Good morning. Let's talk about market structures today. So we've got a spectrum of market structures. What we're really looking at is competition. How much competition is there in a particular industry or market? So from the microeconomic analysis perspective, we talk about this spectrum of market competition. All the way on one end from a market model called perfect competition, where they have no market power, to industries that are a little bit more flexible, easier to get in and out of, but they still have some market power if they do advertising and differentiate their prices. And this is monopolistic competition. So it still has competition, but the word monopolistic implies that they have some marketing power over their competitors. If they differentiate their product, they might be able to get a higher price for it. Along the same spectrum, we next have oligopoly, which is a market structure where you have fewer firms, so the competition is tighter. In these two market structures, you have a lot of firms. There could be 100 or 1,000 firms in perfect competition. It's where your products are all the same, they're homogeneous. It might be something like agriculture. We've talked about this. Grain prices. It could be grain, it could be tomatoes, it could be strawberries, but they don't have any market power because the commodity that they're selling is all the same. In monopolistic competition, you might be selling things that are the same, like shoes or dresses or cosmetics, but the ability to differentiate your product, even if it's similar to your competitor's product, allows you to possibly charge a higher price. Think about any company out there that does a good job of branding. It might be Nike, it might be Kylie Jenner Cosmetics, it could be lots of different things. In this type of an industry, you have many competitors. It's easy to get in and out of the industry, but you do have some market power if, again, you can differentiate yourself either through your packaging or your delivery or your messaging or your product or your service, whatever it is. As we move along the spectrum, as I said, we next have oligopoly, where you have a few key players dominating most of the market. So when we talk about competition, we can say there's a big industry of business, whatever it is, the steel industry. But within the steel industry, there's going to be different markets where they might be selling steel. And within that industry and in those markets, who's dominating the market? Is it one firm? Do they have monopoly power? Is it many firms, but many firms over here? Or is it a few firms that are dominating and have more than 40% market share in an industry? So an oligopoly is where that situation happens, where we try to measure how much are the top 4 firms dominating the market, how much competition is there, or less competition. When there's fewer businesses competing, the competition is tighter. There's less competition. It generally means that prices are going to be a little bit higher, and the equilibrium quantity that's delivered into the market would be a little bit less if there was more competition. So what we're looking at in this spectrum of market structures is the level of competition in each of these markets, and the less the competition, the more ability there is to hold monopoly profits. So in this industry, agriculture, you can get in and out of the industry very easily. If you'd like to become a farmer, you can go plant some things tomorrow, and in a few weeks perhaps be ready to take it to market. Monopolistic competition is things like the shopping malls and retail stores, bookstores, shoe stores, dress stores. It's some restaurants and services, those kinds of things. Those businesses, those small businesses that are easy to get in and out of. When there's a pandemic, these types of things go out of business more quickly. Oligopoly is an industry like the airplane space industry, the airplane industry. You might even consider breakfast cereals or soap products, like Procter & Gamble is one of our largest manufacturers. in the United States, and many of the products that they're making operate in a little bit more of an oligopoly situation where there's fewer competitors dominating the market. So it's fewer competitors dominate the market. And we have a couple of tools that we use to try and measure market structure. There's a tool called the Herfindahl Index, and also the what do they call it? The 4-tier ratio. Gosh, I can't remember the exact term, but you take the top 4 firms, and if they dominate the market, they have at least 40% share. Then you're in an oligopoly market. If the top 4 firms have a 40% share or greater of the market, then there's less competition here. There's going to be some barriers to entry. It's not as easy to get into this market. Over on this far spectrum here, so we're going from no market power to some market power to more market power to lots of market power. Okay, we go from many competitors selling the same product to many competitors selling differentiated products to fewer competitors, and the products could be homogeneous products like chlorine and a couple of the chemical markets, those kinds of things. They're dominated in an oligopoly structure where there's just a few firms dominating the market, and they make their choices differently. They look at what their competitors are doing, and they have some influence in the market because as a total, they at least have 40% share, and the other 60% is made up of smaller firms. On this far spectrum here is monopoly. It's monopoly power. It doesn't mean they can charge the highest price they want. There's still going to be, in a market, supply and demand. But if there is demand, they have more market power, and there's some barriers to entry keeping others out of this market. So we're looking at market structures or level of competition. We're looking at this spectrum here. The one on the far left, perfect competition, is a market model that is in theory, and most of the businesses that we have in the United States operate somewhere along the rest of this spectrum. What you're going to be doing as you're studying these chapters is understanding the framework for these different market spectrums, but also how within each one of them they still need to find that place where they can maximize profits. So firms want to maximize profits. Okay, now this doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation about there being other goals in business besides maximizing profit. Of course we can, and those are good conversations to have. But here what we're going to talk about is the model where the firms are maximizing profit. And so they're always looking to find that quantity to produce where the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost. This is going to be the profit maximizing quantity. Same thing here, 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 and here. If I say, how will the firm maximize profit? They're going to do it a little bit differently. I mean, they're going to think about it a little bit differently in each of these structures. But the first question they'll say is, look for that quantity. If they know their own costs, and if they know the demand curve or have a good estimate of it, then you can find where that marginal benefit or the marginal revenue is greater than or equal to the marginal cost. So what we're doing in this section here, we introduced costs the other day. We introduced right before our break, and we had explicit costs and implicit costs. And then we said for those different kinds of costs, we can also look at it in fixed costs and variable costs. And we know what our total costs are. We can calculate marginal costs. And if we know what our demand curve is, and we know that our revenue is going to be price times quantity, we can look at what is our marginal revenue going to be for every quantity that we sell. And then we're going to be able to look at a graph and determine where is that point where the marginal revenue is greater than or equal to the marginal cost. If we keep adding in a little bit more revenue than cost each time, then our little Lucky Charm pot of profit gets bigger and bigger. The minute you let the marginal cost get larger than the marginal benefit, you're taking out of the total profit. Okay? So here is the spectrum of market structures. Again, there's various categories that you need to know, not categories, but characteristics of these categories. Perfect competition, many competitors. Many competitors, the same product. So homogeneous, they're all the same. Homogeneous products, okay? That's in perfect competition. They also, because of that, are going to have a demand curve that's horizontal, just like that. In monopolistic competition, we still have many competitors, but we have differentiated products. Differentiated. It just means we've made it a little bit different than somebody else's, like a Nike swoosh or some lace on a piece of clothing. Something that makes it different that the consumers like. That gives us a little bit of more market power. So they have some market power. That's the term monopolistic, but it's still competitive. Now, when we talk about perfect competition, we're talking about a market, yes, but now we're zooming in into various types of markets. So this perfectly competitive market is, again, a certain kind of market that's sort of like the ideal if all the products were the same, and it gives us a basis to gauge these other industries, which the reason we want to do that is it's going to tell us whether it's easy to get into the industry or not in the industry, if it's easy to get out of the industry, if there's a possibility for making profit. Remember, in a market system, prices are what's driving resources everywhere. And we can talk about prices and talk about the returns to the resources that we have, and profit is one of those returns. So where there is more profit, more entrepreneurs are going to come into the market if it's easy to get into. So you need to understand a little bit about what the market structure is and what ability you're going to have. So jump into your reading, come back with some questions, and we'll work through some problem sets in the next episode.